welcome back to the Shoogly shed for another episode on the Suzuki GS500 engine rebuild. As you saw last time, we got all the internals onto the sides of the engine, the casings bolted on with fresh gaskets. Next, we're moving on to the top end rebuild, which is essentially the pistons, new rings, cylinders, cylinder head, valves, cam chain, timing, that sort of thing. So a little bit left to go, but the end is in sight.
So the first job for me is to do some work to this cylinder head. I've already drilled out an exhaust stud that was stuck. That was a bit of an epic. The next thing to do to it is to just give it a good scrub and a clean and then get it painted. Then I'll grind the valves, lap the valves, and then I want to make sure the mating surface on the underside is perfectly smooth and flush, and then it should be ready to go on with the cylinder. So to clean up the mating surfaces, I've got this old piece of granite worktop which is perfectly smooth and flat, a piece of 1000 grit sandpaper. I'm going to tape it down and do a figure eight pattern on the mating surfaces to try and just give them that last wee polish and smooth. So what you saw me doing there is a process called honing the cylinders. You are using that grinding drill piece to make a very light cross hatching on the inside of the cylinder. Very light, no heavy scores. The point of that is that as the pistons travel up and down, the oil skirts in the pistons spread oil on the cylinder wall. And those cross hatchings allows the oil to stick a little bit better, and it'll basically help lubricate the inside of your cylinders as the pistons are going up and down. So a little bit easy job. Hones don't cost that much money, the drill bit. So if you're ever into your cylinder, it's a worthwhile job. So these arrived in the post today. These are brand new piston rings to go on the pistons. Silly amount of money for small parts, but they're pretty critical, and it seems like pointless to go to all this effort rebuilding an engine and not replace the piston rings, because they can be quite critical. I've honed the cylinders as well, so fresh piston rings and honed cylinders is a good base to start from. Before I can fit the new piston rings, I need to clean up the old pistons. If you remember rightly, I just bagged these as they came out the cylinders, because they were covered in oil, and actually that oil was quite a good protective layer to stop them corroding. So these are covered in old engine oil and carbon deposits, so these need a good scrub and clean before they get the new piston rings. And obviously I need to remove the old piston rings. Just cleaned the pistons up, they're looking nice and shiny. Next up is to fit the piston rings very carefully using piston ring pliers. Quite important for this job. You basically hold the piston rings with these and you can expand it enough to get them on and then release. These are quite important because piston rings are very fragile, so you want to be careful while you're putting them on. Brand new piston rings in place on the pistons. They are ready to go onto the con rods and then the cylinder slid over the top.
Top tip when you're doing this is stuff clean rags or blue roll, as I have, into the holes where the con rods come out from. That way, if you drop a fiddly thing like a little circlip that holds the gudgeon pin in place, it won't go into your crankcase, and that would cause you a whole lot of problems. So very quick little tip, it takes 2 seconds to do and it can save you a lot of bother. Right, so both my pistons are back in place on the con rods with their fresh piston rings. The next thing to do is to put a fresh base gasket on and then slide the cylinder block onwards. I'm not sliding it off this time, so I think my nose is safe. Go and watch episode 4 if you haven't.
A quick point which is perhaps overlooked is the positioning of the piston rings. This gives you basically positions where you want your rings to face, so where the rear of the bike here and the front here. Oil ring upper is to face this way. That's the oil ring upper rail, is to face this way. The oil ring lower side rail is to face that way, and the oil ring expander is to face this way. The second compression ring faces that way, and the top ring. So that translates to the top ring gap is here, as well as the oil expander, which is under here. And then at the back we have the second ring gap is there, as well as the lower oil rail, and then the top oil rail gap is over here.
Alright, so pistons are lubricated, the cylinders are lubricated. Now I just need to slide this onto the gasket, onto the pistons and then onto the gasket.
So the cylinder is now on. That was a total mission. I had to cut the camera because I was doing a lot of swearing. Next up is to lap the valves. So lapping valves is quite a straightforward procedure. I've got a grinding paste and a valve. Put a little bit of grinding paste on the edge of the valve, and you use this tool to rotate it to finally grind the lips of the valve into the seat and make a nice tight seal. So I've flipped the cylinder head now. I've installed new valve stem seals in there and also popped the springs in. Next up is to put the valves in and the retainer clips. Just like magic, all the valves are now in place, and we've got the springs and the spring shoulders in as well. Next thing to do is to use the valve compressor tool to compress the springs and pop the little collets in that will hold the springs down. And all the collets are now in place. So all it's left to do is to pop the head onto the cylinder.
Last thing left to do is to torque them up to 40 Newton meters.
So all the bolts done up to spec. 40 Newton meters. A lot of strength going into these studs. Rightly so.
So after a bit of a mammoth task, I have got the top end of this engine back together, excluding the camshafts. I will do all that another day because it is well past dinner time and I will have an angry wife if I spend any longer at this. Really chuffed though to have all those jobs done, valve lapping, piston rings, everything like that done today. Really chuffed to leave it there tonight and go and pour myself a beer, a well earned one at that. As usual, give me a like, leave me a comment and subscribe to the Shoogly Shed channel to hopefully see me polish off this engine and finish the job in the next episode. Thanks.